Hi, I'm Kate Tompkins, and welcome to video 2 of the 3-part free video training series. Now, I have another question for you, and that is this. Do you feel unprepared to work with women who are in abusive relationships? If you are, that's okay. Most people don't really feel prepared for that kind of contact. As I mentioned before in the first video, it can be very stressful. And if you did not receive any kind of specialized training in this field as part of your professional preparation, then you can be forgiven for feeling a little bit apprehensive about dealing with this particular clientele, because it is challenging. So if you're not sure what to do, if you're not sure where to start, you're not sure where to help, then you're in good company, because there's a lot of people who feel the same way. And this video series will help a little bit to start you down the path to feeling more comfortable with working successfully and responding effectively to women who are in this kind of situation. So I'm Kate Tompkins. I've been a therapist and an adult educator for 50 years. And during that time, I have taught many people in skills that have to do with basic counseling and with helping women who are experiencing abuse. I have taught basic counseling listening skills to volunteers of crisis intervention call centers. I have taught volunteers working at community peer counseling groups. I've taught volunteers working for women's shelters. I've helped communities set up peer counseling groups. I've helped communities set up women's shelters. So I've been in this field for quite a long time, and I've picked up a few things along the way. Now, if you saw the first video in this series, you will have heard me say that there are things that you can do to help a woman who is experiencing abuse, and there are things you can do to respond effectively. And this video will help you feel more confident about working with this clientele and will help to increase your success and your therapeutic outcomes. I want to say thank you to the people who responded in the comments section for these videos. And I'd also like to thank people who got in touch with me in a more direct way to give me their feedback. Now, if you did not have a chance yet to see the first video, I'm going to suggest that you go back and watch it before you watch this video. And these videos won't be up for any longer than a couple more days, so don't miss out on them. Don't kind of save them, because they won't be here next week. In the first video, we talked about a skill called setting boundaries, which is a critical skill that most people should learn, in particular women, and very much in particular women who are in abusive relationships. And we talked about some of the transformation which can occur when a woman uses boundaries to teach her partner how she wants to be treated. In this video, I'm going to tell you a little bit anyway about how to use boundaries and how to get them to stick. There is an art to this skill. And in the first video, I told you a little bit about how I came to know about boundaries, how I came to find myself in an abusive relationship of my own, how I learned about the skill of setting boundaries from a place called Havens on Gabriel Island, how I developed that into my own system, and how I'm using it now to teach not only women who are in abusive relationships, but also to treat frontline workers such as yourself, how to use these skills and the others that are involved in appropriately supporting a woman who is experiencing abuse in an intimate partner relationship. There is so much value to working with this clientele. There is so much value that comes from helping even just one woman, because it'll affect not only her, but also her children, as she models to her children how to create healthy relationships around her. It can help the rest of her family. It can help the community. It can help civilization in general. The more people who are thinking in terms of how to help other people instead of how to tear down other people are going to contribute to the welfare and the well-being of everybody in our civilization. So it's a skill that I really would like to encourage you to develop. I once worked with a community in the high Arctic. This was decades ago. And in this community at that time, there was a great deal of physical abuse happening, especially in the context of alcohol abuse. And the community was becoming very concerned about the situation and not sure how to respond to it. And there had been a death in the community as well. A woman was beaten to death by her husband. So they wanted to start a shelter. So I spent a couple of weeks in the community and worked with a group of staff and volunteers. Together we established this service, established the safe house, and I trained the staff and the volunteers in the skills that they would need to know in order to operate this shelter. So first of all, you have to know that in a small community where you might have a total population of 60, 75 people, everybody knows where the safe house is. So it's not quite the same sort of circumstance as would occur in a big city where the location of the safe house is kept a secret. Everybody knew where it was. So the kinds of skills that the staff and volunteers needed to have was a little bit different. And some of the things they needed to keep in mind was a little bit different. And one of the things that they were encountering was cultural beliefs and myths around what abuse is and whether or not a man has the right to exercise his power and control over a woman. And there was a great deal of discussion about that. There was also a great deal of discussion about whether or not it was appropriate for a woman to set boundaries or limits on a man's behavior. And a lot of discussion ensued. Eventually, there was a community meeting to talk about the whole idea of boundaries and the whole idea of abuse and where it came from. And it was quite a dramatic moment for that community. They really turned around a lot of things. Now, I'm not saying that that community is an ideal place to live. I'm not saying that no abuse ever happens. I would be very happy if our culture ever got to the point where we could say that, but we can't yet. However, things did improve quite a bit in that community. And a lot of that change came from the idea that it is okay for a woman to set boundaries on male behavior, and that it is okay to stand up for oneself, and that woman abuse is not okay and is not acceptable. So things really have changed in that community. In another community, I was teaching a group of volunteers who are going to be working in a women's shelter. I was teaching them basic counseling skills on how to respond to women. There was one student in that course, a woman, who was kind of struggling a bit with the training. I could see that she was struggling, but I wasn't entirely sure why. Eventually, what came out was that she was herself experiencing financial abuse at home. So the family's finances were not being managed by her husband in a way that she was really comfortable with, but she didn't really know how to approach the situation. And she was having a great deal of difficulty in our training course accepting the idea that it was okay to tell a man, even in a role play, what she wanted and what she didn't want. So after we talked about boundaries and how to deliver them in a safe and respectful way, she went home and sat down and talked with her husband, taught her husband what she needed in terms of control of family finances. And it really turned their relationship around quite a bit. Now, that experience was personal for her, but it was also professional and it was also political, because not only did she gain the confidence that she herself could use boundary statements in order to manage the particulars of her relationship, it also gave her the confidence that she could, in fact, coach other women to be able to use the skill as well. And that turned around completely. She perked right up, and she became a very valuable asset to that organization once she understood what the whole concept of boundaries was all about. Now, you might ask this: is it appropriate really to teach someone how to use boundaries? Isn't that just saying, well, I'm teaching her to use a threat in order to get what she wants? Don't think of it that way. Think of it in terms of natural consequences. So if you have a 3-year-old child and your 3-year-old child is fascinated by your wood stove, one of the things that you need to teach your child is that if your child touches the wood stove, it's hot, the natural consequence is she's going to burn her hand. Well, think in terms of natural consequences. So if I fail to put away the food that the family has had for supper and put it away in the fridge, the natural consequence may very well be that the food will go bad and therefore we won't be able to use it later. Or, and here's another idea of a natural consequence. If you fail to clean up your room, my child, the natural consequence will be that I will be unable to give you the time that you want on your computer. And when we're talking about a marriage or a relationship where abuse is present, the natural consequence is this. If you hit me, naturally, I'm going to object to that. Naturally, I'm going to call the RCMP and charge you. So don't think of it in terms of a threat, because a threat is about control. A threat is about dominance and power. And boundaries are about protecting oneself. Boundaries are about teaching your partner and anyone else with whom you wish to set boundaries how you wish to be treated. And if it's done respectfully, it's very easy for the other person to accept, providing their intentions are good. So if the other person actually does want to have a healthy, loving relationship with you, if that other person really does respect you, when you teach that person how to behave with them, if their intentions are good, they will honor your request. If their intentions are not good, you might find that the situation gets out of control quickly and it's not what you want at all, and you may even be unsafe. So one of the things that you need to teach your clients or your patients is how to determine when it is appropriate to use boundaries and when it is not appropriate to use boundaries, and how to use them in a manner that's safe and respectful. So the next question you might ask is, well, okay, that's really nice, but I don't really know how to use boundaries myself, so how can I coach other people? Well, my answer to that is I have a system. I can teach you how to coach other women, how to use boundaries in an effective way. So here's some of the things that a woman who is using boundaries needs to keep in mind. So first of all, you need to know how you want to be treated. You need to know the difference between what you're getting and what you want. And you have to be able to articulate that fairly clearly in a way that not only you can understand it, but the person that you are dealing with can understand it too. So you might want to provide some examples. You need to be fairly specific. So it's not helpful to say, I want you to respect me. Well, what exactly does that mean? I mean, if your partner is already having a problem with respect, your partner may not know exactly what it is that he's doing that upsets you, and your partner may not know what you want. So you better provide some examples. For example, when we went to that party last Saturday and you insulted me in front of my friends, that was disrespectful. I didn't like that. What I would like you to do is, when we're in public, to be kind to me, not to be cruel, not to be disrespectful, to say things that support me, not things that pull me down. So if your partner has specific examples about the kinds of behavior that you don't want and what you want instead, it'll be a lot easier for your partner to then provide what you want and to honor your boundaries. Now the next part, and for most people this step is the most challenging, you need to attach specific consequences to the actions that you want to see. And those specific consequences, again, we're talking about natural consequences here. They need to be feasible. In other words, things that you can and will follow through on. They need to be reasonable. They need to be things that actually mean something to the other person. They have to actually be a consequence to the other person or they're of no value. And they need to match the severity of the crime or the situation. So here's some examples. If you say to the person, supposing the issue is that the other person chews gum and smacks their lips loudly, and you find that really uncomfortable, and you don't want to do that, you don't want your partner to do that anymore. If you say, if you chew gum again, I'm going to call the police and charge you, Well, that's inappropriate, really. Obviously, it's kind of funny, but it's inappropriate because it's way too big a consequence to match the behavior. But supposing the issue is that your partner hits you and you say, if you hit me again, I won't like it. Well, obviously, that's inappropriate because the consequence is too small. It doesn't provide anything to your partner to give him an incentive to change his behavior. Or you might say, if you swear at me again, I'm going to leave the relationship. Are you really? So if you really mean that, okay. But if you're just using that as a way to up the ante, be careful, because your partner will recognize that you don't really mean that you won't really do that. And the consequence won't have any value. Your partner's going to continue to do whatever he wants to do. And if you set a consequence that you cannot and don't follow through on, for example, if you hit me again, I will call the RCMP and charge you. And then he hits you again, maybe just to see what you'll do, and you don't call the RCMP and charge him, what have you taught him? You have taught him that he can go ahead and do whatever he wants to because there's no consequences. You're not going to follow through on what you said you would do. So the consequences have to be reasonable and feasible, ones that you can follow through on. They have to be ones that match the severity of the crime. They have to be ones, oh, here's one I didn't talk about. They have to be something that the other person sees as a consequence. So supposing you say to your child, if you don't clean up your room, I'm going to take away your TV privileges. Well, if your child doesn't really want to watch TV in the first place, if your child would much rather play on his Xbox, then that's not going to be a consequence for him because it doesn't matter. And it's the same with rewards. If you say to your child, if you do clean up your room, I will offer you 30 minutes of extra time. Well, if your child doesn't want to watch TV, it's not going to be an enticing reward. Now here, I should just mention one other thing. Human nature is such that rewards work better than punishments. So the promise of a reward is usually a better and stronger incentive than the promise of a follow-through consequence that the person would not see as being favorable. So when you can, try to offer a reward rather than a negative consequence. Now, the delivery of boundaries is another really important thing. So posture really matters. So if I'm bent over like this and I'm kind of, looking shyly and using a soft kind of, scared voice, well, how much incentive is that to a person? I would look like I didn't mean it. I would look like I wasn't strong enough to really care. I would look like I wasn't strong enough to stand up for myself. But if I use erect posture and a confident voice and say, if you do it again, this is what I will do, that is much more likely to be listened to and believed. So how you deliver is important. You also need to use language that is easy for the other person to listen to. This is a whole nother topic, but if you use the word I a lot and use the word you hardly at all, it'll go over a lot better. For example, your abuser will be far more likely to be able to listen if what you say is, I feel really uncomfortable right now, rather than, you stupid jerk, look what you did again. And what's the natural consequence? Your abuser's going to shut right down. So when you're coaching a woman to deliver boundaries, make sure that you teach her about I statements. Make sure that you teach her how to mention her own thoughts and her own feelings and what she needs and wants and what the consequence is, rather than saying, you do this, or you should do that, or you ought to do that. He's not going to hear that. He's just going to tune that right out. So that's another important coaching point. Another important coaching point is to teach women how to assess the success of their boundaries. So this is, again, a whole other topic. Perhaps we can look at this in the third video if it's of interest to you. But it's important to keep track of the changes that you see in your partner and her partner's behavior before and after she delivers her boundaries. So if she sees a genuine attempt on her partner's behalf from her partner to change his behavior and to honor her boundaries, that's a really good sign. And it means that there's hope for that relationship. However, if his response is to come back at her and overpower her physically, emotionally, or in any other way, then this is a man who cannot be trusted. If she is feeling at all unsafe physically, if she's feeling like he will take physical reprisals against her if there are weapons in the house, this is not a good situation for her to actually even use boundaries. This is a time when it's time to leave the relationship. So it's important that you coach a woman to recognize the signs and symptoms of total inattention, a total inability or a lack of intention to change behavior. So if she recognizes those signs, then she'll know whether or not setting her boundaries have been successful. If they have, yay, that can really transform the relationship. Maybe they get to live happily ever after. If what she sees is different, if what she sees is more abuse or worse abuse, then it's time to coach her about how to leave the relationship. And I think perhaps we'll include that in video number 3, how to leave the relationship. And you might also ask, what if my client or my patient just simply is not strong enough at this point in time to be able to stand up for herself? What if she just simply cannot deliver boundaries to her husband, or if she and I together decide it's not a safe idea for her to do that? One of the first things that you should do with your client or patient, once you realize or she tells you that her relationship is abusive, is to teach her how to stay safe. So it's important that she make a safety plan. A safety plan includes all of the details that she might need to keep in mind about how to leave safely, what to pack in an emergency grab bag, who she's going to call, where she's going to go, how she's going to get there. Having a safety plan is critical for any woman who is in an abusive relationship, regardless of the degree of abuse that's occurring. Even if it's just mild abuse, she should still have a safety plan. So one of the important skills that you, as a frontline worker, will need to develop is how to help her create a safety plan, and having a template really helps a lot. And that's something I can give you, by the way, if you're of interest. Just if you're interested in having a template for a safety plan, leave a message below and I will email you a template that you can use. It would also be a good idea if you taught her how to cover her tracks online, so that if her abuser gets into her computer and sees that she's been in touch with a counseling agency or with a women's shelter, that might compromise her safety. So you can teach her, you can coach her how to cover her tracks online, depending on what her particular operating system is on her computer. You'll also need to do some education with her. You'll need to teach her what abuse is and what a healthy relationship is and what the differences are. Lots of women have never even witnessed a healthy relationship and wouldn't know one if they tripped over it. So a lot of women were raised in homes in which they were not safe and they didn't have a model for a healthy relationship or how to build one themselves. So being able to compare what she's got right now with a healthy relationship can be quite illuminating. So it's important to teach her how to assess the abuse in her relationship. What kind of abuse is it? How serious is it? What risk has she been in prior to this moment, so that you'll both know what she's dealing with. You can talk about the cycle of violence. You can talk about gaslighting, so that she recognizes when gaslighting occurs. It's also quite useful for most women to understand that woman abuse is not particular to her or to her relationship. It's very, very common in our societies in general, and it's a political thing. Woman abuse is about power and control. It's about misogyny. It's about male feelings of inadequacy coupled with male beliefs that they have the right to be in control, in dominance, and to exercise whatever they need to in order to achieve that dominance over a woman. And in some cases, there's also mental health issues with the man. He may be compensating for some weakness of his own self-esteem. But she needs to understand that, number one, it's not her fault, even if she contributes to it or provokes it. And number two, she needs to know the cultural context. The cultural context is such that our society helps men perpetuate the idea that they can do this to a woman. And that's just life. It just happens that way. And it's important that she understand that rather than think of it as a failure on her part. You can also help her get her finances in order, because if she decides to leave the relationship, she's going to need to have some cash, enough cash to be able to take a taxi, enough cash for a few hotel nights, probably enough cash to buy toys or diapers for formula for her children, enough cash to buy emergency clothing for herself. She'll have to have some money behind her. And that isn't always easy, because quite frequently in abusive relationships, the man will take away her access to her own money or to family money, or make it very difficult for her to access cash when she needs it. So she may need help to get her finances in order. Another very important thing that you can help a woman do, get ready to make big changes in her life, is to assess her own mental health. If a woman already has issues that are plaguing her, that are getting in her way of being able to function, it's going to be that much more difficult for her to take the steps and the actions that she needs to take in order to make changes in her relationship. So it's very helpful to help her assess her mental health, and to refer her to someone appropriate, an appropriate therapist, to work on whatever issues she has, so that she feels more strong and more confident and more assertive before she attempts to make big changes. You can also demonstrate for her self-regulation skills and stress management skills. Self-regulation skills are the ones that help us calm down. That's a whole nother topic too. We don't have time right now to go into that. Google self-regulation skills. There's a couple of really common important ones, such as the deep diaphragmatic breath. There's a number of other things too that you can coach her on as well. Again, we don't have time for that in this particular video. It may be something that could be content or topic for another video, but right now I'll just say that being able to model the ability to keep your own emotions calm and cool and keep your stress under control is a very important thing to teach your client. And finally, give her hope. Hope that she can change her life. Hope that she can be safe. Hope that she can be happy, that her children can be safe, and she can create a great, wonderful new life for herself. That hope can go a long ways. So in the third video, we'll look at how to leave a relationship safely, how to heal from trauma, and how to create a wonderful new life. Now, you'll notice in the section right below this video, there's a spot for you to leave some comments. I would very much like to hear from you. What would you like to see in our next video? And what concerns do you have about your own ability to respond effectively to a woman who's your client or your patient or your resident, if that woman is experiencing woman abuse in an intimate relationship? What are you worried about? What are your concerns? Please leave some comments below. I look forward to seeing you again in our third video, which will be out in a couple of days. So good luck with this, and I hope to meet you soon.